So today is a day of celebration, a day leading into the Thanksgiving week where we take the time to thank God for the great things that God has done for us. We celebrate the success of our annual flea market. And I just heard that they still need help cleaning up over there in the flea market. So if you have an hour or two or three on Monday morning that you could be flexible with and you could come over and help, I know they're really looking for that kind of help. Jerry, raise your hand. If you contact Jerry, he'll let you know what's available to do. But you can just look in the parking lot and see that we need to do some work over there, and they're asking for our help. But we know how many lives are and will be touched by the ministries that emerge from the work that we do at the flea market. We celebrate the ministries that have succeeded beyond our wildest imaginations over this past year. If you haven't seen our annual church conference report with all the wonderful ministry stories that we accomplished over this past year, I really encourage you to take time to read it. There are extras in the back if you didn't receive one. But it's amazing how people stepped up in times when we weren't meeting in person until we started again, and how wonderful things have happened in the life of our community. Because your giving of your time, your talents, your money, your lives has been amazing, especially with the world around us going absolutely crazy. And we celebrate the overflowing abundance of food that has been brought here today that will go to bless those at St. Luke's Home and at Casa Maria, ministry partners here with us at Desert Skies. So we shout with joy for being together and being able to reach those online who aren't yet comfortable being with us in person. We celebrate all of the lessons that we have learned from the past 2 years because we know that God has worked together for good through those who seek God and neighbor. You know, it's just good to know that we're in this together. Yesterday, I went to see the play Hamilton for the third time. It just keeps getting better. And that's probably because I'm more familiar with the story and understand the words better. I mean, having the subtitles on the movie version, that was really a game changer for me. Well, one of the songs in that musical, That Would Be Enough, begins with these words: look around. Look around at how lucky we are to be alive right now. Look around. Look around. So I encourage you, look around. Look around and see how lucky we are. So we're going to talk today, again, once more, about what it means to be and to have enough, which has been the theme of our Bible study and our stewardship series. To be content, to live well, and most of all, to celebrate. In a survey of more than 700 subjects, Kathy Caprino, a senior contributor at Forbes, a marriage and family therapist and a career coach, asked respondents to identify what they most desperately want in life. The question was, if you could say in one word what you want more of in life, what would that be? So think about that for a minute. How would you respond? Well, the number one response was happiness. Joy came in at number 5. Money was number 2. Other answers were freedom, peace, balance, fulfillment, and confidence. The participants in this survey clearly identified a distinction between happiness and joy. And we tend to laud joy as a more commendable emotion than happiness. I mean, we get all excited and happy when something surprisingly positive happens to us. We tap out text messages flooded with emoticons, or we send gifts of celebrity fist pumping. It doesn't take much. We win $5 in a scratch-off lottery ticket, or one that we get from the Safeway checkout line, and we go absolutely crazy. A parking spot magically appears. The husband discovers the on-off switch on the Dirt Devil. Your 15-year-old daughter leaves the house and then returns and says, "You were right, Mom. It turns out that I do need my jacket." Yep, we're insane with happiness, sheer bliss. Life is good. Sadly, such happiness is tied too much to the desires and pleasures of the flesh. So the argument runs. We should yearn for the kind of contentment that is true happiness. And what is the name of that true happiness? Joy. Now, following this line of thinking, we should emulate the joy that one could have, say, if one were cloistered in a monastery or nunnery, sleeping on a straw mat and sipping stone soup from an earthenware crockery bowl. Achieve joy then, and you'll not have only joy, but mindfulness and inner peace, enlightenment, sanctification, and a slew of other doctrinal mysteries we can't begin to understand. Temporal and carnal happiness is often frowned upon as an emotion less than sanctifying and bordering on worldliness. Has anyone ever heard that comparison between happiness and joy? This attitude is, by and large, a gift from our Puritan forebears who, according to H.L. Mencken, were stricken with the haunting fear that someone, somewhere, may be happy. But as we look at our text for today and examine this idea of celebration and joy, we discover the distinction between happiness and joy, which can be a useful distinction, by the way, but it's problematic for today because in our Psalms text, the word happiness is not used. In those brief 6 verses, the words joy or rejoiced, however, are used 4 times. The problem? Well, this joy about which the psalmist writes is clearly what we typically call today, happiness. Uh-oh, maybe we need to take a closer look. You see, the psalmist remembers a time when the Lord had restored the fortunes of Zion. And perhaps the memory is a relatively recent one, given that this is probably a post-exilic psalm, and the author is referring of the return of many Hebrews from their Babylonian captivity. I mean, you can imagine the joy of the exiles when they approached Jerusalem. And you can understand why they thought they were dreaming. When they realized their good fortune was the real deal, their mouths were filled with laughter and their tongues with shouts of joy. And some of you have shared with me that coming back to church, actually in physical body, is like that. You want to give shouts of joy. And the author, the psalmist, is reminiscing. Back then, he says in so many words, we were so blessed. Our hearts were full. I mean, clearly their joy was linked to their good fortune. And what the author of Psalm 126 now suggests is that he would like to experience that kind of joy again. Restore our fortunes, O Lord, like the watercourses in the Negeb. May those who sow in tears reap with shouts of joy. Those who go out weeping shall come home with shouts of joy, carrying their sheaves. So he recalls God's mighty deeds in the past, and he's calling for a fresh visitation of the divine presence here and now. Don't we all have times in our lives when we look back with fondness to simpler times? Maybe even a happier time? For sure, a pre-COVID time. It would have been a time when everything was going right. There was love, a relationship, children, a good job, good health, no COVID virus, everything one could want to be both happy and full of joy. A time when our relationship with God seemed really special too. We were sort of in sync. Perhaps we could even use the words of the psalmist. We were like those who dream. Then our mouth was filled with laughter, and our tongue was shouts of joy. Our lives were together. The pieces just all fit. And then something happened. Most recently for our collective community, that something was March 2020. And the pieces flew apart in a jumble and a tangle, and now most of us spend a great deal of time calling on the Lord to restore our joy. Do something to make us happy, Lord. And since that's what the psalmist was praying, it's probably okay that we're praying the same prayer. Well, I'd like to say that God has heard those prayers from all of our hearts. And God has done great things during this pandemic. And AARP, my friends, took the time to write 15 of them down for us so that we could use them to celebrate the good and ponder once more about how God is at work in our lives even when we aren't aware that it's happening. So here is that list. See if you agree. Lesson number 1, family matters more than anything. Lesson 2, we have unleashed a revolution in medicine. One of the biggest lessons that we've learned from COVID is that the scientific community working together can do some pretty amazing things. Lesson number 3, self-care matters. For sure, we learned that busyness may not be the best measure of success. Lesson 4, be more financially prepared. Far too many people were unprepared for emergency expenses that were brought on by the pandemic. And we learned just how close to home that was for many. Lesson 5, the adage, age is just a number, has new meaning. At the beginning of the pandemic, it seemed as though our older population was bearing the brunt of the virus. But what we learned is that our health is actually directly related to our lifestyle, nutrition, physical activity, a healthy weight, restorative sleep. And while age does account for a higher risk, comorbidities, essentially having 2 or more health issues simultaneously, they mattered much more. Lesson number 6, we befriended technology, and there's no going back. Arguably, the biggest long-term societal effect of the pandemic will be sort of a grand flipping of the switch that makes the digital solution the first choice of many Americans for handling life's tasks. We still may cling to what they're calling the IRL, in real life experiences, but it's increasingly apparent that easy to use modern virtual tools are actually the new default. Lesson 7, work is anywhere now. A shift that bodes well, actually, for many Americans. One of the major impacts of this new working from home focus is that more jobs are actually becoming non-location specific. We have so many more options than we used to have, options that are viable and that make good business sense and that refer back to number 1, that'll have allowed people to spend more time with their families. Lesson number 8, our trust in one another has frayed, but it can be slowly restored. You see, history reminds us that this isn't the first time we've been through this. In the wake of the 1918 influenza pandemic that killed between 50 and 100 million people, trust in authority withered after local and national government officials played down the disease's threats in order to maintain wartime morale. Historian John M. Barry points out that the head of the Army's Division of Communicable Diseases was so worried about the collective failure of trust that he warned that civilization could easily disappear from the face of the earth. It didn't happen then. It's not going to happen now. Lesson number 9. The crowds will return, but will gather carefully. Masks and sanitizers will probably be part of the norm for years, the way airport and transportation security measures are still in place from 9/11. I don't think that the COVID-19 pandemic is going to end with a ticker tape parade or bells tolling. Instead, it's more of a slow and cautious easing back into familiar activities. We see that here, where there are a few more people that show up each and every Sunday. And we've learned that we can't expect the same old, no matter how much we personally want it. Lesson 10, loneliness hurts health more than we thought. We learned from COVID that isolation is everybody's problem. And the church is uniquely positioned to help with that isolation. And while we haven't been perfect, we've kept connected in ways that have been life-giving and sacred for so many people. Lesson 11, when your world gets smaller, nature lets us live larger. One silver lining to COVID-19's dark cloud, nearly 60% of Americans have a new appreciation for nature because of the pandemic, according to one survey that also found that 3/4 of respondents reported a boost in their morale while spending time outside. By nearly every measure, our planet got more love during COVID. And wouldn't it be nice if that continued moving forward? By nearly every measure, we've experienced growth and goodness, even as we've been experienced inconveniences and things that have hurt our hearts. Lesson 12, you can hope for stability, but you'd best be prepared for the opposite. COVID-19, perhaps more than any other disaster in my recent memory anyway, demonstrated that we need to continue ensuring that response plans are flexible and scalable. You can't predict exactly what a disaster will bring, but if you know what tools you have in your toolkit, you can pull out the right one when you need it. Lesson 13, wealth inequality is growing, and it affects us all. Lesson 14, the benefits of telemedicine have become indispensable. And lesson 15, our cities themselves are changing. How we live, how we organize our towns and cities, our churches and our communities are going to create long-lasting changes. I found that to be a great list, and I'm sure that that's not exhaustive, that you all have learned some other lessons. I'd love to hear about them. But the closing words of that song, That Will Be Enough, from Hamilton say, if I could grant you a peace of mind, if you could let me inside your heart, oh, let me be a part of the narrative in the story they'll write someday. Let this moment be the first chapter where you decide to stay, and I could be enough, and we could be enough. That would be enough. That would be enough to be a part of the journey into the future of the church, of the movement of the Spirit, of a celebration of the life that we as a church have in front of us. And our pledges today, they write the first chapter of the rest of our history. May God bless them, and may God bless you. Amen.